Hello there, my name is Dr. Jack Stack, and I'm recording this video today because I wanted to take the time to talk a little bit about the academic job market. I'm someone who got my PhD in 2025 in the spring, and I spent the last year in the academic job market. And recently, I'm very excited to say that I have achieved a dream job at Bowie State University. And I wanted to talk about that experience going from finishing your PhD to an academic job and talk about the challenges, talk about some things that worked for me, some things that I wish I had done differently, and to offer some advice and encouragement. I know that this is a very difficult time. I usually record kind of general science interest videos, but this is more for fellow scientists, especially those who are earlier in their career than I am. So this is especially for PhD students and PhD candidates in the sciences. So the first thing I want to say is that the job market is really tough right now. It's never good, but it is really tough. There are very few jobs, and the fact that you have to do all your applications online kind of makes it a lot harder because every job that's posted gets a deluge of applications, right? So you're kind of this one person out of these thousands of people, depending on your field, right? Because some fields have more jobs, but the more jobs a field has, the more people that are applying for them, right? So there's a couple of pieces of advice that I got that I'd like to share and a couple of things that I learned that really helped me out. The first thing I'm going to say is that it's tough. It just is, right? And I'm going to say something that's going to sound harsh at first, but it's not harsh. You are not special. I am not special. Nobody is special. The job market is hard for everyone. So if you're having a hard time, if you're applying to jobs and you're like, I really like this job and I think I would be good for it, and you never hear back, or you have experiences like I had where I had jobs I really liked and I was like, oh, this would be so cool, and you interview and you don't get it, right? It's not about you. It's that these jobs are incredibly competitive. You're usually competing against hundreds of other people, right? And there's only one position, usually, right? So remember to yourself, right? Like, this is not happening because I'm like specially, unqualified. It's just that it's hard. And in my experience, I applied for, so in the time between when I was working on my PhD in the summer of 2024 is when I started applying for jobs. And when I was offered a position at Bowie State, it's about 18 months-ish I was applying for jobs, right? And that includes, I applied to everything from postdocs to tenure track faculty positions at R1 institutions. I applied to teaching jobs at community colleges. I applied to R2s, R3s. I applied to government jobs. I applied to tutoring jobs, teaching jobs. I even applied to a job where I would be teaching kids how to play chess. So I applied to a really wide variety of jobs. Over about 18 months, I applied for maybe 200, 250-ish jobs, which is actually not a lot if you like go on LinkedIn and people are applying for like 10 jobs a day. I didn't do that. I recommend not doing that, right? So it's really hard, honestly. Like, and just remember that, right? And the only way to get through it is to keep trying, right? Because the reality is maybe you get really lucky early on. I certainly did it. Right. But there was a real, about a year in, I was really close to giving up. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, I was very, very close to say, I was literally saying, like, should I just stop trying to do this? Like, is this worth it? And this is where so the first piece of advice is you're not special. It's hard for everybody. The second piece of advice is that the best source of motivation to keep going is internal, right? It's great to have a support system and all that stuff, but ultimately try to find motivation internally. And what I mean by that is those of us who love science, right? We're getting into this because you've probably had a love and a curiosity for science and for knowledge for most of your life, right? Maybe it started in high school or elementary school or in college, whenever it started, right? There's some spark of curiosity, of love for the science, love for serving people, love for education, whatever it is, right? Focus on that. That is what got me through personally, is I looked within and I said, look, I really love this and I'm not going to give up, right? Even if that means I have to take some other job while I keep applying, right? That's what ultimately happened for me. So look within for motivation, right? It's going to be really corny. I'm a very corny person, but in Avatar the Last Airbender, Uncle Iroh says, "In the darkest time, hope is something you give yourself." That's the meaning of inner strength. And I really believe, I always thought that was a little cheesy until I actually experienced it with this job market. And that's literally what happened. Like, I was literally like, am I going to give up? And there's just a part of me inside that said, no, I'm not giving up, right? And it took a lot longer. Like, it's not like I was successful the next day, but don't give up and look inside for motivation. So sorry about that. And this is like not scripted. I just wanted to get these thoughts down just so that while it's still fresh in my mind, and share them, and hopefully they're helpful to some people. So those are two very broad pieces of advice. Let me give you some more specific things. Number one is that you're not going to know exactly what opportunities are available in advance, but you can prepare for opportunities. So if you're doing your PhD right now, I highly recommend that you sit down and you think about, like, okay, I have my area of research, right? And you're obviously working towards your PhD. I recommend trying to build up as many skills as possible. Talk to people, take classes outside of your very narrow focus, read papers, right? Try to get teaching experience, these kinds of things. Network, go to conferences, right? That is what's going to prepare you for success, right? People skills especially. This is something that is underrated in sciences, but people skills are so important. The ability to communicate your science to somebody who's not in your narrow field of interest, the ability to teach, the ability to give talks, the ability to just talk to other people and have good interactions is so important. So people skills are a very important thing to start working on in grad school, right? And one of the best ways to do that, in my opinion, is to try to get teaching and science communication experience as much as possible. Something that I did that actually really helped in the job application process is I wrote general interest blogs about my science just on the side, right? And that helped me think about what are people interested in and how do I communicate why my science is so cool to other people. I'm in a very narrow field of the taxonomy and systematics of reef and fishes, like my friend the sturgeon back here, right? It's a very small field. So I learned and thought about, how do I communicate why this is important and why it's so interesting to other people? And that was very, very important. So science communication skills in whatever form, right? It can be teaching, it can be outreach, it can be writing, whatever works best for you, whatever you find the most fun, right? But I really recommend science communication, networking, people skills. If your institution has classes, especially in pedagogy and science communication, highly, highly recommend taking those opportunities. Because remember, right, in your PhD, you get these blinders on, right, where you're so focused on your dissertation and your experiments, and it's like this tiny, narrow little field that I work in, and you forget, right, that by the end of your PhD, you're probably going to be the world expert in this tiny, narrow area. The challenge of the job market is now you have to be able to sell yourself and sell what you do to people who are 95%, 99% of which are not going to be in your field of study, right? So you have to be able to talk to and communicate with other scientists and with other people at whatever institution you want to work with. So being able to talk to members of the public, being able to talk to students and policymakers, administration, everybody, right? Those communication skills are so, so essential. So try to work on those communication skills, especially for the next thing I'm going to talk about. So that's number 3, right? It's communication skills. The next part is, even though each job application is different, I recommend taking a lot of time and taking a lot of, basically really thinking about and putting on paper, like, okay, this is what I do and this is who I am, right? Because what you're going to have when you apply to a job, right? Most jobs, it depends on the individual job, but most academic jobs are going to ask for a cover letter. And a cover letter is a 1-page thing that goes at the top of your application, right? It used to, before the age of the internet, it used to physically go on top of your application that says, hi, my name is this is what I do, this is why I'm interested in this job. Now, obviously, your individual cover letters are not going to be exactly the same for every institution, right? But you should really start thinking about like, okay, this is how I'm going to structure my cover letter. I highly recommend that you start your cover letter by saying, I'm interested in this specific job. That's really important so that the person who's reading it, who by the way has to read hundreds of these things, can automatically say like, okay, this person knows what job they're applying for. You'll be surprised how many people submit cover letters for the wrong job, right? Instantly out, right? You say, hi, my name is this. I'm interested in this job. You can say something like, I have an undergraduate degree in biology from this institution. I am working on my PhD here. I'm really interested in this field of research, and I think this job is well suited for me because of this. You could say, I love teaching. Something I talked about is I applied to local universities, and I talked about being new in the community and wanting to contribute to the community, right? That it's individual to you, right? But really spend some time on your cover letter and think about like, what are the most important pieces of my experience that I can communicate? Now, your cover letter is going to change depending on the type of job. I recommend that what I ended up doing is I had a research position cover letter, so like postdocs, R1 jobs, that type of thing. And I had a teaching position cover letter, right? That was community colleges, teaching jobs at other institutions. And those should emphasize different areas of your experience. And this gets me to another point, which is that your CV is probably really long, right? Which is great. Congratulations, you've done a lot of good stuff. But especially at the initial stage, they're not going to sit there and read through 10 or 12 or 15 pages of your CV, right? It's important that you submit it so that at the next step, right, they can look at it. But you really want your cover letter to be concise and to single out, like, these are the pieces of experience that are most important for people to know, right? I had the opportunity at Virginia Tech to be the professor of record for a class called Age of Dinosaurs, which is amazing, right? I put that right, like especially for those teaching jobs, that was like the first paragraph was like, hi, my name is this, and I'm interested in this job. I was the instructor of record for Age of Dinosaurs. Like, you want them to know that you have the relevant experience. Because what they're doing is they're saying, okay, with each application, is this somebody who is relevant, who is interested in this job, who has relevant experience? Is this person not, right? Which is why I don't recommend, there's some people who are like, oh, just apply to every single job. Don't do that. Look for jobs that you are qualified for and focus on writing good applications for those jobs. Everybody writes at a different price or a different pace. I spent a good deal of time writing basic cover letters that I then modified for individual jobs. For teaching jobs specifically, I really recommend taking the time to look at the institution, to look at what they value, right? Read about them, like, what do they value, what are their goals, and to look at what classes they offer and what classes you could help teach. Because remember, with those teaching jobs, what they're thinking is like, okay, what could this person do for us, right? And if you look and you see, for example, maybe they don't have a class in what you did in your PhD, you say, hey, I would be really happy to teach a class on my area of expertise, right? So you could say, like, let's say that you're an invertebrate biologist, right? You study annelid worms, and you see that the institution you're at doesn't have any classes on the biology of invertebrates or worms or anything like that. You could talk about why you think that class would be valuable for the institution and that you would teach it. And then you could also teach that I could teach their introductory biology, I could teach your evolutionary biology. Sorry, my shirt is digging into my neck here, right? And you could basically add to the department, right? Try to talk about like what you bring, what you would add, right? All that good stuff is really, really important. So that's cover letters, right? Which is basically your little pitch. Who am I? What do I do, right? And try to be as specific as possible, right? It's very important to be specific to the institution. I looked up those classes for each institution I applied to. I looked at their classes to see what would be relevant, what I could teach, right? And then, of course, you can select from your teaching experience and say, I would be successful at teaching a class on my area of expertise because I served as a TA for this class at my PhD institution, and I really wanted to be able to teach the class myself. Something like that, right? It has to be specific to you, but be specific. Use examples, right? And don't be afraid to say I and we, and you can even be passionate, right? Say, I love teaching evolutionary biology. It is my passion, right? Show them that you have passion, that you like doing things, right? And of course, postdoctoral cover letters are different. You're talking more about your research experience and the research you want to do, right? That is very different. Which brings me actually to my next point, which is your cover letter is sort of concise. I actually really recommend making a resume in addition to your CV. Resume is a one-page document that highlights your most relevant experience in bullet points. Highly, highly, highly recommend doing that. Well, especially in the first pass, they're probably not going to read through your entire CV. Having that like, okay, this person seems interesting. Resume like, oh yeah, so they taught this class, they have these research interests. Okay, they go in the good pile, right, rather than the bad pile. And I that's something I did later in my job hunting thing, and I thought that was really useful, right? And you can, in a lot of jobs, you can submit both, right? And your CV is kind of like, okay, if I make it to the interview round, right? Because remember, there's rounds where they're taking the giant pile of applications and narrowing it down, and say, okay, we're going to interview these 10 or 15 people. And then there's the next round where we're going to interview these 3 people, and they're going to give a seminar, right? And you want to be basically, the CV is more important after you get past the big pile of applications. Let me think. That's cover letters, resume. I'm trying to think what else. For finding jobs to apply to, I would say Higher Ed Jobs is a really good website for finding places. LinkedIn is also okay. Not as good. LinkedIn is a little bit harder to separate out good jobs from bad jobs. Higher Ed Jobs was very good because all the jobs I found on there were real. Unfortunately, there are jobs that are scams, jobs that aren't real, and it seems like the job scammers haven't really infiltrated Higher Ed Jobs, which is a testament to that website. That's the one I used. I highly recommend. If you're wondering, like, well, how do I find jobs? Higher Ed Jobs is really nice because it allows you to sort by region. It allows you to sort by field of study. And don't, by the way, get too focused in on like, well, I'm a biologist, I can only look for biology jobs. Look around, right? See what there is. And this is gets my next piece of advice is don't just apply for every single job, right? That's not a good strategy because you're not looking for, 1,000 crappy applications, most of which you have very little chance of getting, right? Because even if you manage to slip into the interview round and they're just telling you like, you're not relevant for this at all, you want to really focus on and find jobs that you are excited about, that seem interesting to you, that are relevant for you. But don't get too it's kind of like a balance, right? Because you really want to be applying for a decent number of jobs, but you don't want low quality applications, right? So if a job is kind of on the margin, you're like, I'm not sure, go ahead and apply for it, right? Just see, right? But don't write junk applications. They get enough of those. And that brings me to another piece of advice, which is I know generative AI stuff can make job applications easier. A big goal in your job application is to be you. It's not to try to be the most unique and special. It's not to try to be, not trying to mold yourself into what you think they want. Be yourself, right? Be open, be honest. Don't try to be anybody else. Talk about your experience, talk about your goals, talk about your passions, right? Take the time to really think about how to sell yourself. And I highly recommend having other people read your materials, your cover letter, your resume, to see like what did they think, right? This is especially good with people in your life who are not scientists, right? To see if there's any pieces of jargon that you're missing and something like along that line. This is why I recommend not using things like ChatGPT or anything else to write these materials. There's a lot of problems with those tools, but one major problem is that they don't write things that are interesting or unique, right? Because they're a mathematical model for language, they're going to write something that I'm sure you can have it spit out a cover letter like that. And I'm sure it looks like a cover letter, right? But it's going to look like everybody else who uses ChatGPT to write it, number one. And number two, it's not going to be interesting, right? You want to write things that are interesting, things that are exciting. You want to talk about your research and how cool it is, right? I talked about, in my teaching experience, I talked about how awesome it was that at my PhD institution, we had this big collection of vertebrate bones and osteology. And I talked about getting to take out an ostrich skeleton and show students these actual real specimens. And I talked about my passion for teaching with real specimens, right? Which I've gotten to translate into the teaching I'm doing. Like last week, we did dissections, right? We're dissecting grasshoppers and crawfish and all sorts of other cool stuff, real specimens, right? So that passion translated into the job, right? So take your time and really think about who you are and what you want to do. That will help you with your motivation, and that will help you write a good cover letter that people will actually enjoy reading, right? I'm trying to think, and I didn't really script this out very well, so I'm trying to think if there's anything else. So to summarize, you're not special. It's okay that it's hard. It's hard for everybody. Be yourself. Look within for motivation. Take your time to work on your communication skills and really think hard about how you're communicating yourself. Take the time. Be passionate, right? Passion is good, right? You don't want to be like everybody else, right? Not that like everybody else is bad, but you want to be yourself is really important. I think that's about it. Oh yeah, higher ed jobs is good. I just wanted to get all these thoughts down. Is there anything else about job applications? Grad school? No, I think that's it. I hope that this ramble was helpful for somebody. And if you're out there working hard in your job applications, it is hard. I believe in you, right? But don't look to me for motivation. Look inside and look to that spark, that curiosity, that love that you have for your science, that love that you have for education and for research and for knowledge. Look to that in the hard times. That's what will get you through. All right. Have a great day.